Hello, I'm Linda Markowitz. I want to speak to those of you who are hurting right now. I want to speak specifically to those of you who are drowning in pain because you've been abused, betrayed, lied about, stolen from, rejected, or violated in any way. I know that pain. I have been violently stolen from. My daughter was taken from me in a senseless and brutal homicide, shot to death by her boyfriend. As you look at me now, you can clearly see that I'm not a grieving mother. So what happened? I want to tell you what happened. God led me to make one single choice, and once I made that choice, He gave me the grace to follow through, and I was quickly and permanently set free from that choking pain and grief. The same thing is freely available for you too. Please stay tuned for this SuperChannel special presentation with Victor Bowers as I share my story.
Greetings! It's Victor Bowers here again, coming to you from the studios of SuperChannel Orlando, WACX-TV. In Altamont Springs, actually, is where our studio's at. And the Majesty Building up the street and all the wonderful things that God's doing in our community. And so welcome to today's special broadcast. I don't know if this is a studio direct or SuperChannel Presents, I'm not sure what it will be yet, because it's such a profound topic and story that we're going to share with you today with a guest of mine who's familiar perhaps to many of you, Linda Markowitz. Linda, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a sweet opportunity for me. I've watched the program that you have been doing, and
Yeah.
I'm excited with God's plan and His purpose for your life, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's, to be honest with the viewers, because perhaps many of you are new or have never watched the station because we're getting on new venues and new formats everywhere with technology. But I have to be honest with you, I've known Linda for many years, and Linda works here at the station full-time and then part-time and back and forth, as well as running your own ministry and doing your own thing side from what you do here and helping Frida and and being part of the staff. But so I've known you obviously for many years, and you're like family, and I don't know if you're a sister or an aunt, maybe somewhere in between.
Yeah.
But aside from all that, you have an interesting account in your life that happened to you, or that involved you many years ago, and you've written a book, and this is the book that yours won't come with all the Post-it note, but the book that she wrote, which is really the story of part of her life, called I Find No Fault. And it is an account unlike anything you've probably ever heard of, except for when you read the Bible and you read about God the Father and God the Son and what they did for humanity on the cross. But that's going very deep, very quick.
Yeah.
But anyway, Linda, I don't know if I should just hand this over to you to tell part of the story to begin. I don't even know where to begin. It's such an interesting message. And just at the same time, to me, as Victor and as a friend, it's like this is what the gospel is. The story that happened to you, involved you, and how you handled it and how God's worked in your life. And then that spread to the lives of others. That is the closest thing to the gospel I've ever seen lived out in front of me. And it's quite profound. So how would you like to start to tell of the story that is written about in I Find No Fault? Where does it begin?
Yeah, where does it begin?
Which beginning?
Yes. I think, Victor, that what came long before that is very essential and necessary for our viewers to understand. I had a relationship with God that was powerful from the inception of the day I met Him. When I met the Lord, at the very beginning of my relationship with Him, I was baptized in the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues. And I believe, Victor, that had I not had that relationship and that power gift, and it had had engaged for so many years with that power gift, when this incident I'm about to talk to you about happened, I don't think I would have had the same outcome.
Right.
And I want to leave our viewers with the understanding that, when you hear this story, you may say, well, that would never be my reality. That would never happen to me. And I'm saying you're probably right. If you don't have an ongoing, invested relationship with the Lord, when you come to tragic places or places in your life where everything is just causing you to drown, you're not always going to make the right choice. You will rarely make the right choice.
Right.
So I want to preface the story by saying that I was saved and baptized with the Holy Spirit for probably 15 years prior to this event. I haven't counted those numbers up, but somewhere in that window of time. And I had an ongoing relationship with the Lord. That's key to this story.
Right.
That's very key to this story. And this story goes back 25 years ago. 25 years ago, that's a long time ago. You'll understand why it took so long to tell the story as the story progresses. But 25 years ago, I was married, as I am now, to my husband, have two daughters, two wonderful daughters, Marcy and Michelle. And Marcy, my oldest daughter, lives in Indiana, and Michelle lives in heaven. And this story is about Michelle.
Right.
This story is about Michelle, and it's about God's amazing ability to come into every situation, even the most darkest and the most impossible, and bring his life and goodness.
Right. Yeah. The story is about your daughter, Michelle, who was dating a guy, and things went wrong in the relationship, and they were on a dark path, and one thing led to another, and the story is that the boyfriend murdered Michelle.
That's correct.
A violent murder. There were some extenuating circumstances of drug abuse and all sorts of things that had happened that were part of the mix, but it ended up, at the end of the day, Michelle was dead at the hand of her boyfriend. And a violent murder that you can get into are the circumstances. And as I was kind of just doing some more research for today's show, you just prefaced this, it wasn't like you were, you were a minister.
Yes.
She was basically, and she was like a preacher's kid, because you were a preacher of the gospel, an experienced, seasoned preacher and believer in Christ. And you might say, well, these things don't happen to ministers of the gospel.
Right.
But yet still, your response and just things that started happening at that moment, once you started hearing the news and all the things that were happening, it's profound, your response. And I think your response coming out of your faith in God and what God challenged you to do and how to respond, how he guided you.
Right.
When this moment hit.
Yeah, Michelle had been dating this man named Ray, and I'd only met him 2 times. I met him the Christmas prior to her death, and I also met him on Mother's Day prior to her death. When Mother's Day came around that year, my husband and I and Michelle and Ray all went to Mother's Day brunch together.
Right.
My husband and I went to church in the morning, and then Ray and Michelle joined us at the restaurant, and it was a delightful day. And as I said, this is only the second time I'd ever met Ray, didn't know much about him. He seemed to make Michelle happy. She seemed to be okay with the relationship. I wasn't real happy in the mix because I'm the preacher. Right. And my daughter is living with her boyfriend.
Right.
Sometimes preachers' kids are the most messed up kids.
Yeah.
They sometimes need a lot more help than you think. If you might be praying for your pastor's children more than you pray for your pastor, that might be a blessing for them. But nonetheless, it was a wonderful day. It was really a wonderful day. And a month passed, and I was in Port St. Lucie ministering.
Right.
Ministering. I went to Port St. Lucie to minister. I had friends that I had known in New York who had now moved to Port St. Lucie. We'd been friends for years, and they invited me to come and minister at the church that they had started in Port St. Lucie, Florida.
Right.
And so I went for that purpose. I went for that purpose. And because they were friends, I wasn't just going to pop in on church and pop out. I was going to leave on Saturday morning, and I was going to spend Saturday, Sunday, and Monday with them and come home on Tuesday. That was the plan. Friday night before I left, Victor, I had the most profound dream. I had a profound dream. I dreamed that I had sent both of my daughters, Marcy and Michelle, airline tickets to come and visit me.
Right.
And dreams can be very weird, and this dream was weird. I could see them simultaneously, even though they were not together. I could see each in their respective homes. I could see them trying to pack. I could see the things that they were putting in the suitcase, jumping out of the suitcase, and they fighting to put things back. And it was so strange. But then the dream changed, and I was standing on a tarmac. And the plane actually came really close to me. A ladder came and began to unload the passengers. The passengers started coming, and I noticed every single passenger had a suitcase in their left hand and an airline ticket in their right hand. How weird that seemed to me, how strange that seemed to me. Well, they came off the plane, my daughters came off the plane, and my youngest, Michelle, came a little closer to me quicker than my older daughter, and she reached out to hand me her ticket. She had her ticket, and she reached out to hand it to me. I didn't know why. I just reached out to take it. But before I took it, Victor, this huge hand came from around my right side, came over me, it just engulfed me and took that ticket.
Right.
And I turned around to look, and I didn't see a figure or a face, but the light that was blinding me from not only externally but internally made me believe in the dream that was Jesus. Well,
Because all you saw was just a presence of light.
Bright light, brighter light than I've ever seen, ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But just bright light. There was a form of, almost the form of a man, but I saw no features of a man.
Right.
And but in the dream, I felt that it was Jesus. So I asked the Lord in the morning to give me an interpretation because I felt it was a spiritual dream. Didn't receive anything, got in the car Saturday morning, drove to my friends. We just had a wonderful day together. Sunday morning, we went to church. It was wonderful. Everything was wonderful. And then we came home from church and had a wonderful meal that the wife had prepared. A nice Italian cook made me some lasagna. It was wonderful. And I'm not a napper. I don't nap. As a general rule, I don't nap. But that day, I said, I just really would like to lie down for a few minutes. Strange. That was really strange for me.
Right.
And I went to the bedroom where I was staying and took a very brief nap. And in that nap, Victor, I had the same exact dream that I had Friday night. Now, I, by this time, know this is a spiritual dream. If I'm having the exact same dream 2 separate times, I know the Lord's trying to say something to me. So I got up and told my friends about the dream. And, I mean, they're ministers, they're pastors of a church. They prayed with me, and we all just came to the conclusion God was trying to say something to me about my daughters, and specifically about Michelle. Things changed pretty rapidly after that. We went back to church in the evening. Came home from church and just got home from church, and the phone rang. I heard the phone ring. I was in the daughter's bedroom with her. We were just playing with my jewelry and my makeup like you would do with a young girl. And they came in, the pastors came in and told me that Lee was on the phone. Lee is my husband.
Okay.
And that he had something to tell me. And what he had to tell me was certainly not what I expected in any way, shape, or form. Actually, his mother had been ill and was staying with us, so I thought maybe something happened to Mom.
Right.
But that's not what Lee said. What he said, Lenny, what I have to say to you is the most difficult thing I will ever tell you. He said, Michelle is dead. Ray shot her to death. Even now, all these years, those words are still really piercing.
I know when you said it, it's like it even took my breath away and I wanted to ask, well, how did you respond? But before you can I'm just kind of awestruck, because those are words that don't register. They still don't register to hear them,
right.
Much less I can imagine saying them. But yet they were spoken to you by your husband,
right,
about your daughter. So what happens?
I wish I could just articulate the rapid fire thoughts that came through my head and what came up out of my spirit. I tell you, my very first thought was I was going to come home and raise her from the dead. Now that may seem radical. Yep.
Take it from me, viewers, audience. If you know Linda, that's not a far-fetched statement or thought.
No.
A woman of great faith.
Yes, I have. Yes, I had been doing resurrection practice on dead people before, so I had no problem doing that.
As we should, as believers, that's part of being in Christ, is the raising of the dead.
Exactly.
But nonetheless.
So I was just going to jump in the car and come home, but the pastor, my friend, would not let me leave. And I stayed for several hours with them, and they were insisting on following me home. It was just a bizarre time, just a really bizarre time. But I knew I needed to go home. And after a few hours of staying there, I made the drive home. And in the drive home, something really remarkable happened. I'm in Port St. Lucie.
Right.
I get on the turnpike to come north to Orlando, where I live. I had not been on the turnpike hardly any time at all. And I felt compelled to get off, and I pulled into a convenience store parking lot.
Right. This is, carry on, because this is a part of my ratty notes that I made note of. So please continue.
I didn't need to stop for anything. I don't think I'd been in the car 15 minutes. I mean, it was that soon after leaving their house that this exit came.
Right.
And I didn't need anything. I pulled into the parking lot. I began to intercede in tongues from a depth in my spirit I had never been acquainted with before.
Right.
It was profound. I don't have words to describe that.
And I was about to say, probably there were no words.
There were no
words.
words.
What do you pray? What do you pray? I mean,
in English, not a word.
There are no words.
There is nothing.
But your spirit, like Paul tells us in the Word, your body groans with words and expressions that even you can't. There's no word for it. Your body is just praying,
Yeah, and from a depth I've only experienced one other time. So it's a profoundly deep place that God wants to connect with, I think, when He's wanting to do the miraculous.
I agree. They go, you're hit. And folks, by the way, all this is outlined in her book. I find no fault. You'll love it. You'll put stuff in it yourself. But it's available on her website, lindamarkowitz.com, and we'll be putting up some graphics throughout the show, so you can contact her and get this book and some other resources she also has, and also book her for ministry. But you're right. When God begins to work in a person's life, he goes completely deep, but beyond words, and that's why praying in tongues, which is also another vital part of this interview, and this story, it's the only way to connect to the deep places God wants to take each of us in our walk with Him.
Exactly.
It's going beyond our words, going beyond our thoughts, beyond our training or lack of training, and He will lead and guide us, but He does it where we, through this prayer language. But anyway. It's
that connection spirit to spirit.
Right.
That place where everything natural, everything you know, everything you see, everything you hear, feel, none of that has any relevance. Yeah. It comes from that place.
And it's a very intimate, it's almost an embarrassingly intimate place to speak in tongues or to pray in tongues, because it feels certain, your head's saying one thing, but that's sometimes the only way to deal with such great emotion and grief, and at this point what you're experiencing, shock, who knows what else. But
yeah, I have another resource available that you'll be able to find on my website as well. It's called Fire Up Your Power Tools, which is a book on tongues. Not what tongues is, but what are you doing when you pray in tongues, which is an important thing that I learned from that experience. But anyway, I didn't need anything, so after sitting...
So at the convenience store, you don't need anything, you just felt compelled to pull off.
And prayed at this powerful place. I don't even know, probably less than 15 minutes, I don't remember exactly, but not very long. And didn't get out of the car, got back on the turnpike, came on home, and there was a point in the car where I was very aware of the presence of Jesus sitting in the passenger seat. I was extremely aware that he was there, and he just took the whole car over. It was just his presence was so real, and he said something to me. He told me, Linda, I don't want you to be angry. I don't want you to be angry. She's with me.
Right.
I have her. She's with me. And I thought, okay, all right, okay. So to move the story on, because it could take forever to tell the story, the situation was that the next morning I couldn't sleep in the night. I went home. I visited briefly with my husband, briefly with his mother, and we didn't know what to say to each other.
Right.
What do you say?
And there's an account, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, where it's during the night and you can't sleep and you're in your kitchen and it's dark. And according to what I was reading and what I've heard in other interviews you've done, 3 things happen. There are 3 that I noted. And one was the Lord told you, don't be angry. I've delivered Michelle from much. Then the Lord said, I want you to forgive Ray. And then the Lord said, I want you to embrace Ray as a son. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because that's unbelievable. But what was that about?
Well, at the moment, I had no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, and I sort of had the same question. I sort of had the same question. I tell the story now because, as I said earlier, it's a 25-year-old story.
Yeah.
And I've been living this story for a really, really long time. But for the viewer who's hearing it for the very first time, I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Would God even require that? Would he even require that? Well, obviously not of every person in every circumstance.
Yeah, and that's one of my questions. Perhaps I'm jumping the gun, but I mean, like, how dare you? Has anyone responded when you tell the story of what we're kind of trying to graciously unfold? How dare you forgive someone who's done this to your daughter? Or how could you? Or what kind of mother are you? Do you ever get those responses? I mean, because the reaction to your response could be violent, emotionally,
Yeah, it has been pretty rough at times, because that is the number one criticism I get. How dare you? How dare you defile her and her memory?
Right.
How dare you do that by forgiving this man?
And yet, Linda, in the gospel, that is exactly what God does. How dare he send his son to do something for us and for humanity?
Right.
It's scandalous. What Christ offers us and what God gives. It's ridiculous. It doesn't even make sense. People still deny it or reject it or fight against it. And it's the only way to live a human life that's that's joyful, that's worth living. But in the kitchen that night, the Lord spoke to you. You said very powerfully. The kitchen was dark because you didn't want to wake up your mother-in-law who was on the couch. And in that darkness is where God began to work at a deep place, perhaps that you didn't even know existed within you, and asking you to do things that were beyond probably your own ability.
Way beyond.
Yeah.
You
said
beyond.
A river of grace took hold of you, and there was a download of grace. But it came as a result of your obedience.
The grace didn't come until I acted. Faith is not just something you believe. It requires a work. Faith without works is dead. And so until I actually acted and said out of my mouth, the action I did was say, okay, all right, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't even know why you're asking me this. But because you ask and because I trust you, I say yes.
Right.
And instantly, I still remember that.
Yeah, and it's for the viewer, you may be listening and your jaw is just sitting on the floor and saying, and there's a lot of information here, and that's why the book is a good resource to make yourself to get. But that is, that's part of the journey of the believer, and when these things happen. And we want to respond like, how could you? We want to we want justice and we want this and all. There's a place for all of that, but in the story of your life radically changed that moment.
Something
happened to you from beyond your control.
Right.
But yet you were now affected. And your decision would affect your life, your family's life, the family of Ray. A whole system was changed and affected, empowered by your decision in the kitchen. And I think the decision that God empowered you to make, he offered you something, and because you trusted him, which came because of a relationship with him over a period of time, which is available to anyone, you blindly stepped into a place of just basic obedience, and said, what did you say? I mean, I'm struggling.
I don't think I had, it wasn't wordy. It wasn't wordy. It was basically just a verbal, okay, yes, I will. I don't know how. I don't even know why you're asking this, but I trust you. I trust you, and you'll have to help me to follow through.
Okay, so to fast forward a little bit, because we're about at halfway point, and we're going to Ray's here with us today, and so we're going to invite him on in a little bit. But it all kind of started going. It went to court, and there were conversations with the state. There was a death penalty that was advised, and you responded against that, or to a different degree. And then Ray went to prison. And but in all that, you begin to develop a relationship with him, and to kind of make true the words that God asked you to forgive Ray, and to embrace him as a son.
It's a remarkably profound performance of the extravagant grace of God.
Now, you had obviously met Ray
twice.
I mean, did you have any impression of him as her boyfriend, or just, I mean, I wouldn't think this would come up in a person's mind, just meetings, I mean. Oh,
there was never, ever a thought that he would hurt her ever in any way, shape, or form. When I met him first at Christmas, I was a little agitated. I just, I didn't, there was just something in my spirit that wasn't right. And I talked to her about that. And she just assured me he treated her fair, and that was good. But when I met him the second time at Mother's Day, I actually found him rather charming. I mean, he was pleasant, and Michelle was happy, and we had a wonderful day. I mean, there was not even a tiny blip on the radar screen the second time. But going forward, the result of what actually happened made me rethink. It made me rethink where was my spiritual discernment?
Well, let's take a break right here. This is a good place to stop for a moment, and Ray's going to come up and join us on the set, and we'll continue this compelling story that's outlined in this book, I Find No Fault, available from Linda Markowitz Ministry, lindamarkowitz.com. So we'll be right back.
In our short time together today, it is impossible to share more than just a few highlights of our story. That's why I encourage you to get your own copy of I Find No Fault. In it, both Ray and I tell you about our journey. I tell you about my encounter with God and how I received His extraordinary grace that set me free from unbearable pain, and I help you make sense of forgiveness. I show you what true forgiveness is and what it isn't, and how to forgive those who have hurt you the most. In the book, Ray tells his own story about the spiral of hopelessness his life was in prior to killing Michelle. When you read his story, you'll clearly see the message of the cross, and it will give you great hope for the salvation of all your unsaved loved ones, regardless of how dark and hopeless their lives may be. Order your copy of I Find No Fault today.
Welcome back to this special program from SuperChannel and the astounding story, true story of a friend of mine, Linda Markowitz, and a new friend of mine, Ray Cheramaglia. Did I get that right? I wrote it down phonetically. But it's a story, and you and I were kind of just rehearsing before we came back from the break about where to pick up. And I actually realized part of the reason I wanted to do the interview and do it personally from the station was the station lived through, you were working here full time when all this kind of was in its beginning stages. And so I've kind of lived this story, in part with Linda, as well as other staff members here at the station. This has all kind of been an account that we kept track of for, I guess, 25 years as it kind of progressed through. And Ray, I had never met you. I had met you many times in Linda's conversations, but I'd never met you up until recently, just very recently. And but for viewers who are perhaps catching up or just joining us, this is the story of a mother and a daughter and a boyfriend and a girlfriend and a bad moment in time where there was a murder that was unexpected, came out of some bad situations, but there was a death, there was a prison sentence, there was a prison sentence completed and justice served, but yet over all of that, there was radical forgiveness. I guess when I say radical forgiveness, so forgiveness is radical in the nature of forgiveness is radical, but there's forgiveness, restoration, adoption, all of those words that we use in Christian talk, Christianese, because that is what God extends to all of us.
Right.
We're all sinners saved by grace, as the saying goes. We don't deserve any goodness in life. In fact, the world only offers despair and doom or addiction just to numb you out while the despair is happening. But God offers life and abundant life, and he offers you not only that and forgiveness, he offers to take you into his family and to claim you as his.
Right.
You know, that's the message that we're in here at a Christian TV station. Our business is proclaiming the gospel. But I could go on and ramble on. But anyway, Ray, nice to have you to the table.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome to the program. And Linda, welcome back.
Thank you.
So when we left off, Ray, you had been served your sentence by the state to go to prison for the murder of Michelle and all the charges. And anyway, so I'll let you pick up the story and kind of just go from there.
Well, on the first half of the program, we talked about the fact that the Lord told me to forgive Ray.
Right.
And that he didn't tell me. I'll take that back. He asked me. He didn't force it on me. He gave me this option.
Right.
And he does it for all of us. So he asked me to forgive him, and then he also asked me to embrace him as a son.
That's the hard. That's
the hard part. That's the hard part. That's the hard. Actually, as a minister, I sort of got the forgiveness part. I sort of got that, but I never thought that. I mean, I can forgive him and leave him over here on a shelf,
right.
Which is what lots of us like to do. But anyway. Going forward, when he was incarcerated, the Lord gave me an opportunity to connect with him. His mother gave me his mailing address. I had connected with his mother. As you know, in these circumstances, it's not just one person or one family member. This is a huge tidal wave. It affected Ray's entire family. It affected my entire family.
And you're from, as the accent will give away, you're from New England. You're from Boston area, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you came out of a Catholic upbringing or just the Catholic Church is what
Catholic
your exposure to the gospel?
What they call crib Catholic,
Yeah.
Christian
Cradle Catholic,
yeah. Definitely a Catholic. Italian and Catholic, so it's, it's even more.
So your family was all up in New England.
Yeah.
And you were down here in Central Florida area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And his mother came for a visit to visit with him, and I met her at that one time. It's the only time I ever met her. Developed a relationship with her, and I began to communicate with her by phone for the rest of her life. And actually, just prior to her death, Lee and I went to Boston to the hospital where she was, and I went specifically to tell her, that Ray was there.
Right.
That he was there. That I brought him in my heart for her.
Right.
And she did pass away, but she was the one that provided me the information on how to connect with him. And so I wrote him, and initially he didn't respond. It's sort of, what do you do with this? It's new for both of us. We really, it's weird for both of us, actually. Yeah. And I was granted one visit with him while he was still in the county jail before he was sentenced. It was a part of what they called the Victim Rights Act, where a victim has the opportunity to confront the offender.
Right.
And so they offered it to me. They asked him if he would agree, and he agreed to the visit. So I went to see him in the 33rd Street Jail here in Orlando. That's where he was.
Right.
And that changed everything. I think that visit changed for him, and it changed for me, the dynamic of the relationship. I believe at that point, we both knew this is real.
When did you begin to dawn on you that there was a bigger story here, or a bigger picture, or
it was really when I went to prison. The county jail was still, I was still in transition, more or less. I mean, I had accepted Christ at that point. Linda had told me that she, forgave me, but it didn't feel real.
Right.
It just felt like I was still in the same nightmare that I was experiencing. As far as I knew, my life was over, and I was, I was just ready to die. That's just what all I wanted
Now,
to do.
part of yours, after the moment, after the death had happened, and you were kind of reeling from that, as it's outlined. And by the way, shameless plug, but Linda's book, I Find No Fault, is the story, is the written account of this story of these two people and many others. But in the book, it talks about you had thought about committing suicide. You'd wanted to, when you were fleeing and just kind of running from what had happened. And so anyway, so you're in prison, in jail, and Linda had told you that she was forgiving you, but what was your response, or did you even have a response?
I was just in tears. I was just in total tears. I couldn't really say nothing.
Could you believe that she was forgiving you, or is it just words?
Oh yeah. That's what really, for the most part, for the whole part, is what actually made me believe that what God was whispering in my heart and what He was trying to get me to understand and to see is that the forgiveness didn't come from just Him, that it came from Linda.
Right.
And I really felt it. I mean, I really felt the forgiveness, and all I could tell her was I was sorry for what I did. Sorry for what I did. And we cried the whole time.
Yeah. And this is in the one visit.
The one visit.
The only visit, I guess, you were able to have.
Correct. The state would not grant me visits once he was sentenced and moved to permanent facilities. I never saw him again from that one visit until he was released.
And how long were you in prison?
23 years, 9 months.
Wow. So you only saw the one visitation. And so how did the relationship progress for the rest of those over 2 decades?
By letter, initially by letter, and then eventually by phone call. We would have a scheduled phone call every week that I was in town, and we talked on the phone. So basically, mail and phone is all we had because I wasn't allowed to visit.
Wow. So the relationship continues, and then I guess you're given a parole date, or how does the sentence work out?
I earn gain time.
Okay.
Which would be 20 days a month. So for every month that I stay out of trouble, I get 20 days off the back of my sentence. So the date moves from the front to the back.
Yeah.
Really, to break it down so it's easier, for every 3 years I do, they take 2 years off the back. So it goes from, say, 2032 to 2030, and then 2027, and so forth, until it gets to the point where it meets. And then at the last month of your sentence, you don't get no more gain time. You're doing the rest of the time day for day. So technically, I did 23 years and 9 months on a 37-year prison sentence.
And the day of release comes, and how does everything begin to wrap up regarding his sentence ending and the continuation of life?
Lee and I, my husband and I, picked him up at jail. The day before, that almost didn't happen because the facility found out the relationship. When they found out the relationship of who was picking him up, you can tell that story.
Oh, I mean, it was really funny. I was at work on the farm, and they called me back to the work camp. So the classification wanted to talk to me. So I go in, and classification officer's real serious. And she's all right, please sit down. So I sit down. Okay, now I figured they're going to tell me something else, that, something about my release. And she said, do you know Lee Markowitz? I said, yeah, absolutely. Well, do you know who Linda Markowitz is? I said, yeah, she's married to Lee Markowitz. Yeah, I know what it is. What's up? He said, do you know? And she was like looking around, like she was like it was a conspiracy. She said, did you know that they're the victim's parents? I go, they are? Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
I do know that. They're like, I'm like, is there a problem? They're like, well, no, we don't have a problem with it. Do you have a problem with it? I said, of course not. They're like my parents.
Yeah.
You know what
The
I mean?
classification officer was so convinced that we were coming to pick him up to do him harm.
Oh, yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah, and actually his very, very dear friend, very dear friend, was going to come the same day and decided not to, and ultimately told him that same thing, that he thought he'd never see him. He really genuinely thought as soon as we picked him up, we were going to do some harm.
It was really kind of funny because after Linda and Lee left, he said, "Boy, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." I go, "What do you mean? You think they were going to take me off somewhere and, you know, do me harm?" He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "That's what I would have did." I'm like, "No, bro, that's not God.
Yeah.
God is forgiveness."
Yeah, and that's, you know, as I'm sitting here listening and just kind of, you know, I'm like, because again, we lived this being Linda's friend and working with her. We lived this through her. Every week or every month there would be an update, or we'd hear your name, you know, from her conversations and stuff. But we never knew who this guy Ray was, except the story from the past, and that you were in prison, and so I never really met you until just very recently, and so I'm like, well, you know, like I had preconceived notions of what kind of guy Ray would be, you know, because this is an unparalleled story. I mean, how do you know, and we're so apprehensive, like how do you act? But the reality is we're all human, and we all have a story, we all have a past, we all have things we've done, made mistakes, and what God offers is forgiveness for whatever you've done. It's forgiveness. And yeah, there's consequences sometimes, and there's justice that is served, and those are understandable. But in Christ, everything is made new. You know,
Brand
you
new.
are a new creation. You're not the old Ray. It's not only old; it's dead.
Right.
That's a dead man. And the Apostle Paul and part of this story has just enlivened my faith. It's put skin and bones on my religious belief system, Christianity. You know, because again, this is a testament to me of this is what God does and offers to anyone.
Right.
That He'll give you a new life, no matter what you've done. He offers you forgiveness. He offers you grace, which is ridiculous. It's almost scandalous because we want to try to earn it, like a little bit, you know, maybe. But the God's like, no, none of it matters. None of it's good. I'm going to just let go of all that stuff. Let go of that past. Let go of that history. Pay what the state or whatever you need to do. But in me, there is new creation. There's new life. There's a new start. A new something it doesn't. There's even no context for it because it doesn't exist yet.
Right.
And that's what God offers. Does it give you now a message of a different perspective on forgiveness or like how do people respond? We may have touched this earlier, but it's so radical. How do people respond when they hear the story or they meet you and then they perhaps finding out about a little bit of your history?
Right.
You know, how does it affect people?
You know, this is a sad commentary for me, but I
Right.
get most criticism from the church. People that are unsaved and unchurched, they get it.
Right.
And it's actually a message of hope.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh my goodness, if that's possible for him, then anything's possible, you know. I do get a lot of criticism from the church because there is this religious thought that this is unforgivable, that
Right.
murder is unforgivable.
Right.
But I say all the time, but you murdered Jesus.
That's
Right.
You murdered the Father's Son,
Right.
and He is willing to forgive you, and
Right.
He's willing to take you home. So why is this such a hard message? Why is this such a hard message? I'd like to just dial back a little bit, just to not leave our viewers hanging.
Yeah.
We said earlier in the first half that after I left Port St. Lucie and headed home, that I got off at a exit
Right.
in Port St. Lucie, just a few miles after getting on the turnpike, and stopped at a convenience store. And all I could do was pray. That's all I could do was pray. Well, I want you to know that it was at that convenience store that Ray turned himself in.
The very same the very physical location.
The very physical location.
Because I read that in the book, but I couldn't put, there's so many different pieces and parts, but so it was the very same store.
And that intercession was beginning to unfold this whole thing. He had turned himself in hours earlier at that location. He probably was still in Port St. Lucie because they took you. Where did they take you
To
first?
the Port Lucie police station.
They took you to the port, and he was probably still there waiting for transport back to Orlando.
Right.
Because the crime happened in Orlando. And he was probably still somewhere close by. It was just a few hours after I had been notified. I was at my friend's house. I don't even know how long. I don't know. But that's an important part, that God will do whatever he needs to do. He will intersect, and he will use whoever is willing to bring to bear his plan.
Right.
I love that about the Lord. I love that about the Lord.
Right.
And so now the message we share together is that God forgives. God forgives. In the book, the book is powerful.
Yeah.
It is powerful. The way the book is designed is I tell my story, and then I knew when it was time to tell Ray's story that it was going to be really difficult for me, and I didn't even know all the components. And the Lord had also told me when I was getting ready to write it that I was not to defame him because he was no longer that man, and
Right.
he's now my brother. Well, thankfully, the Lord spoke to me and told me to let Ray write his own story. And so we sat down together, and he dictated and I typed, and those were some of the hardest moments ever because I learned things I didn't know.
Yeah.
But Ray's story is his story, and he tells the heartache and the drug addiction, and he tells the graphic parts that are necessary to the story to understand that God will forgive anything.
Right. And Ray, in the book, you dive into this more, but you came out of a rough past, or there was pain in your life growing up, and drug abuse, and the whole drugs, sex, rock and roll, the whole thing the world offers, and paints in such a beautiful light, and you were living in that pain, but you were just trapped.
Oh, yeah.
From what I can recollect, in the book.
Oh, yeah, all day long. I mean, we as young men grow up and we think we can do anything we want. We're invincible. We can just, whatever we want, it's ours. We're going to do it. And, we don't realize we walked down a very dark road.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got to the end where as far as I was concerned, I was in the grave. I was just covered in my sin, and I was done. I was done. I was like, when that all happened, I was like, God, just take me. I'm done.
And there was even a moment where you wanted to commit suicide.
Oh, yeah.
And the gun didn't go off, or something kept happening where it wasn't working.
Yeah, it wouldn't fire. Three times. Like 3 times I put that gun in my mouth, and 3 times it wouldn't fire. But when I pointed it away, it fired.
Folks, it's in the book. That's all I can say. But, and I listened to that, and I'm thinking, God could even see through your despair and your total loss of hope. But he's like, even, saving your life by failing at suicide. I know it's bizarre, constant, but that is the length and the breadth that God goes to save us.
Right.
It's just, just mind-boggling.
It is.
So, Linda, when you go out and minister and tell this story, and how do you? There was a phrase in your book called where you talked about you releasing forgiveness, and forgiveness obviously is the key component in this story of redemption.
It is
the obedience to forgive,
right,
and to embrace what God has for you, which can be daunting. But releasing forgiveness, how does that work, and how does a person turn in that direction?
I say, Victor, and I believe that forgiveness is the one thing we can do that makes us the most like God.
Wow.
It's the one thing we can do that makes us the most like God. And what he does is release us from the obligation. And that's what real forgiveness is. If you can just change the word from forgiveness to release. When I was able to see that all I needed to do was to release Ray from any obligation he had to me.
Right.
That's what true forgiveness is. If I just let him go from any obligation he owes me, and then it's between him and God, I can walk free. Because what unforgiveness is poison. I heard another minister one time say that refusing to forgive is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right.
That's what unforgiveness does for us. And the person we set free, we think is Ray. Trust me, I was set free. He benefited as well, but I benefited because it'll destroy you to hold on to unforgiveness.
Do you think that when we hold on to unforgiveness, as you're talking, I'm thinking to hold on to choose not to forgive when someone has violated you, you're basically telling them you want something back that doesn't exist.
Right.
You're demanding repayment for something that is impossible at this point.
But
So
there is no repayment.
right. But there is opportunity for new creation in
Yes.
God. But if a person chooses not to forgive or not to forgive fully, maybe conditional, I mean, it can come in varying degrees, but does that tie even God's hands?
I believe so. I do believe so. I'm thinking in terms specifically of physical healing because I have seen this happen where people refuse to forgive or they don't forgive fully, and it begins to destroy the physical body.
Right.
Unforgiveness can destroy the physical body. The things that we hold on into our soul can actually eat and erode our physical flesh. And once we learn this process and we understand God forgave, we can do the same. He did, we can. The byline on the book is called The Liberating Power of Forgiveness because that's what forgiveness did for him and me. It set us both free.
Right.
It liberated us both.
Yeah. How does someone do that? How does someone do what you did? I mean, we talked about your prior ministry, and you were a follower of Christ for years and a powerful minister. But still, how does someone forgive something like this? Or not even, I mean, people are going through divorce or going through abuse or going through all sorts of things. Just open up the newspaper and you hear the violence in society.
Right.
How does, and then you're told God tells you to forgive. Well, that's easy for you to say. Someone may. So how does that work? I mean, what is,
Right.
like, how do you respond when you, because I think we know, and excuse me for being wordy, but I think we know we need to do it. It's something we ought to do. It's good to do it, but it's virtually impossible. So how does someone forgive something of great magnitude, a great violation?
I say all the time that forgiveness is two parts. There's two parts to forgiveness. The first is a choice. It's just a choice.
And it's not a choice that feels good.
No. It's just a choice.
It's obedience.
It's obedience.
Okay.
It's just obedience. It's just blind obedience. Like I did in my kitchen that morning. I just said, okay. I don't know how. I don't know what this looks like, but okay. The second part is a process.
Right.
There is the obedience, and then there's the process. And I love to tell this story. Corrie ten Boom was incarcerated in a concentration camp in World War II, and she was brutally, brutally tormented by the Nazi guards. And years later, she was free. She was now an adult, and she felt like that by grace she had forgiven the Nazi guards, but she would have these memories that would come back, and they would absolutely torment her over and over again. And she began to think, well, maybe she didn't forgive them. Maybe she didn't forgive, and she began to talk to her pastor about it. And oh, Victor, his counsel to her is prime. I am telling you, this is premier stuff. He said to her, well, Corrie, don't you remember when you were a little girl and you wanted to ring the church bell? How I would let you come in and you'd grab the rope and you'd swing on the rope and it would pick you up off of your feet and you would swing and the bell would ring and the community would hear it and everybody loved the sound. And didn't you love those moments? And she said, oh, those are some of my favorite memories. I love ringing the bell. And he says, but do you remember that there was a time that I said, that's enough, you have to stop. And so reluctantly, you would have to let go of the rope. She said, I remember. He says, did the bell stop ringing when you let go of the rope? No, she said, the bell kept ringing, but it just kept getting softer and softer and softer. And he says, it's the same thing in your heart with forgiveness.
Right.
Let go of the rope, and it will get softer and softer and softer in your heart. I've held on to that over and over and over again because I didn't have these warm, gushy, wonderful feelings toward Ray initially.
Right.
It was totally blind obedience. But I can genuinely say now that I love him. I genuinely love him. I call him my son. He calls me mom. And that didn't happen until I let go of the rope and let the process do what it needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a constant process of releasing and accepting the new person that you are, and we're all in that moment by moment. Always, and once you start the journey with Christ, he starts fleshing these things out, and it's a lifelong process of growing and maturing and releasing and accepting the way God sees you. And that's why reading his word is so invaluable, because when you get down on yourself or those old memories, that history keeps wanting to resurrect. And you have to say, what is the history? What is this? Or what is the truth? Right. What is my past, which is a reality? It exists.
It's a fact.
It's a fact. But there's the truth, which trumps fact. Truth doesn't negate fact. It just supersedes fact. So the truth is in the Word of God, in the Bible. And so you go to the Word to remind yourself what God says about you and thinks about you and God feels for us in certain ways, emotionally. And that is, that's the daily path of forgiveness. So, Linda, as we close up, you're a profound minister and you go out and minister. So how could someone contact you for ministry?
All the information is on our website. You just need to go to our website, which is probably on the graphic now, but just myname.com, lindamarkowitz.com. And you're welcome to join us for any of the meetings that we have. And if you're interested in inviting Ray and myself to come minister, we would welcome that invitation.
Amen.
We love to tell the story. We love to let people see that this is a genuine living example.
Right.
This is a living example of what God does for every single human being that says, take me.
And Ray, you live, you drive trucks, or you're a truck driver, and you live in the Central Florida area, and regular Joe and an old dude,
That's
like
it.
bro and all that.
Oh, yeah. Amen.
He's a Harley rider.
The whole thing with forgiveness is, like you said, the key thing is obedient.
Right.
Jesus wasn't joking when he said, if you won't forgive, then my Father in heaven won't forgive you. So bottom line is this. You have to be done with it. Give it to him. Be obedient to him. That's what I've done. I mean, I've come a long way in 25 years. But I am a child of God.
Yeah.
I'm an obedient child of God.
Yeah, and you're a powerful minister. When I first heard you speak, just briefly, I'm like, there's something he's saying. I mean, this is an astounding miracle that's even unfolding now at this table, just to see what God can do in the lives of people. And so, Ray, it's wonderful to have you on the set today and to hear you're part of the story and to see where God's taking you. And
Well, thank you, brother, for having me.
yeah, it's just awesome. And thank you for joining us for this segment from SuperChannel with my guest, Linda Markowitz and Ray Ciaramaglia. I guess that's Italian, right?
Yes, sir.
Very Italian.
But this is a story that you can read about in her book, I Find No Fault, lindamarkowitz.com, and other resources she also has available, and invite her to come speak for your service or your organization. But we hope this program has blessed you and perhaps challenged you as a believer in Christ. Like Linda said, it's sometimes easy for we Christians to be slightly judgmental or to hold, to have our own religious caste system, so to speak. But Jesus says that's not the way. Everybody comes and everybody's embraced, and there's love and mercy and forgiveness for all who want it. Just
Absolutely.
Open your arms and receive it. So from SuperChannel to you, we'll see you next time. God bless you.